If you do an internet search for worst car ever made, and you read all the lists and the blog posts and you watch all the videos you find, you'll see a few repeat offenders. Cars that crop up on multiple lists and in multiple videos, which means if you take the rules of worst car ever by general consensus, probably are some of the worst cars ever made. And one of the cars that seems to crop up on many of these lists is this one, the Chrysler PT Cruiser. The thing is, there are many cars which, back when they were 15, 20-year-old second-hand cars not really worth a great deal, were shunned and ignored and called some of the worst cars ever made, which are now regarded as genuine classics. So we wanted to find out if the PT Cruiser really is as bad as the rumours and the internet would have you believe. To understand why the PT Cruiser exists, you need to look at where it came from. Back in the 1980s, Dodge created its K-Car platform to create a series of small, more efficient cars to go up against the wave of Japanese economy cars that were flooding into America and gradually taking over the domestic market. Unfortunately, these small, economical and worthy cars weren't exactly exciting, and Chrysler Dodge had got a reputation for creating perfectly acceptable but rather dowdy cars. By the late 1990s, they were keen to refresh their image a bit. That all started with the 1997 Plymouth Prowler, a car inspired by 1930s American hot rods, which didn't just look outrageous in a concept form, but made it into production almost unchanged. The thing is, the Prowler, because of how expensive it was to produce and how exotic the body was not a cheap car. What they needed was a car to appeal to the youth that was more affordable and that would give them that youthful image they were striving for. And in 1997, the same year that the Prowler came out, we got exactly that, a concept car called the Plymouth Pronto. Essentially a family hatchback, but with the same radical retro styling as we saw on the Prowler. 3 years later, it hit the road in production form, all but unchanged, except now it was wearing a Chrysler badge and called the PT Cruiser. And if you didn't know, PT actually stands for Plymouth Truck. It's easy to say that the styling looks a bit outdated and ridiculous now, but don't forget, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, retro styling was in. This was the era that gave us the Jaguar S-Type, the Rover 75, the new VW Beetle, and the R50 Mini. Modern cars with retro faces was in and big at the time. Unlike other retro-style cars of this era, the PT Cruiser wasn't directly inspired by any one specific car, but generally by wood-panelled American station wagons of the 1930s. In fact, they even did a Woody special edition with faux wood panelling down the side to be extra classy. Daimler Chrysler's Dieter Zetscher said the PT Cruiser was a way to have head-turning style and practicality and value all in one package, and he did have a point. Unlike the VW Beetle, which compromises practicality over the Golf it's based on to give you more style, the PT Cruiser is a genuinely usable family car. This large rear end, for example, behind this big tailgate, is a massive boot. You genuinely would have no trouble getting a dog and your family shop in there. And it's got neat little touches, like this parcel shelf with multiple layers on it, so you can move it up and down, divide the boot, and there's even a prop that goes out underneath it to make a mini table if you want to eat under here. And the theme of retro style but with practicality continues inside the PT Cruiser as well. These two massive panels here are colour coded to the car itself. You've got these really nice inset bezel dials, this retro styled steering wheel, and a gear knob that looks like a pool ball. But beyond all that, this is a genuinely usable and practical interior. The headroom is enormous, the legroom is massive, and you get a nice high-up driving position. You get all-round electric windows, heated electric door mirrors, air conditioning, a really good stereo. You get all kinds of features that you'd have to pay extra for on more expensive family cars. Practical and comfortable and well-equipped. What's not to like? Unfortunately, because most of the money for the development of the PT Cruiser had gone on the wild exterior and the cool but functional interior, there wasn't a great deal left for the mechanicals. It shares various underpinnings with Chrysler's Neon, and the engines are a combination of its EC and ED petrol and diesel engines. That means the driving experience is not very pleasant. For a start, there's the steering. Yeah, it's not the most accurate steering in the world, and nor is it the most feelsome or the most direct or the most pleasant to use, and the lock is appalling. You're going to be at the end of the steering rack just to go round a roundabout. What's more, this is a big car, so it's got quite a sizable turning circle. The gear change is pretty horrible, to be honest. It's notchy, it's vague, and half the time you find yourself looking down to make sure you've A, got it in gear, and B, you've got it in the gear you were intending to. Dynamically, the only real good point of the PT Cruiser is the engine. This car's got the 2-litre petrol engine, and whilst it isn't the most powerful or the fastest engine ever, it's not too bad. It's relatively smooth, it does drink a fair old bit, but it's torquey enough, and all things considered, for a car so big and heavy, it moves it along respectably. But in the corners, this is not a pleasant car. We're filming this up on Beachy Head with some fantastic twisting roads, and around every single corner, I can only be described as clinging on as it rolls around and pitches and decides what it wants to do. It's worth remembering though, this isn't supposed to be a sports car. This is more of a rival to the likes of the Renault Scenic and the Vauxhall Zafira, and neither of them are exactly sports cars, are they? And nor did it matter to the people who bought them. Over its life, they sold over 1 million of these things, which made it almost as successful as that, the new VW Beetle. So if the PT Cruiser was stylish for the time, and cheap, and practical, and relatively comfortable, what went wrong? Well, as we all know, by the mid-2000s, the retro styling fad was over. The 75 died when Rover did, the S-Type was replaced with the XF, a far more stylish, more modern Jaguar, and although the new Beetle did soldier on into the 2010s, by that point, almost no one was buying them. And the PT Cruiser, unlike some of those other cars, didn't even have a nice driving experience to lean back on. And nor did it have quality to lean back on either. This is a cheap, late 90s American car, and unfortunately, it lives up to all the stereotypes. Everything you touch in the interior is, yeah, very plasticky and very unpleasant. Although it's worth noting that this car is 18 years old and it all still works. It's all lasted well, but yeah, when you see the dashboard flexing, it doesn't fill you with confidence. So over 20 years later then, where does that leave the PT Cruiser today? From being like a concept car with number plates back in the early 2000s and being the hot ticket to the coolest family car you could buy, to being the subject of joke and ridicule. As a car in its own right, it does have its flaws, but that said, it does have its good points. For a start, it is quite comfortable, it's really spacious and practical, and it does have a certain charm to it. Because it's not the same as every other pedestrian family car from around this time, it's something different, and there is a sort of weird appeal to that. And it's cheap to buy, and you can be part of an owners community that love their cars, because there's nothing else like it. I can't really call it a classic yet, and certainly a lot of people would say that it never will be. But it must be said, is it the worst car in the world? Most definitely not.